Welcome to the Backyard Professor Chess videos. I'm going to do a video literally under my pergola in my backyard. We're going to see how this works. Now, I recently played a game of chess that was a blitz game. And blitz games are interesting because you don't have a lot of time to think and strategize. You just have to kick it out as best you can and hope for the best. This was an intriguingly fun and interesting game to play. I began with the queen pawn opening, and I'm trying to practice this opening as best as I can so that I can kind of get the flavor for it, and I'm fighting a Dutch. Now this is an interesting situation because Dutches are difficult to play against if you're not quite sure what to do and what you're doing. And I'm not convinced I do, but I'm going to go ahead and play just as fast and hard and furious as I can. I've been playing this enough that I know some of the basic general moves and mistakes not to make, as well as mistakes that I do make, I iron out. Now, of course, this is going to be a fight for the center. He's going to hopefully develop his king side so that he can come along the king side. And he's already hitting his square, the central square. In the Dutch, that's basically the goal. Now, of course, he's got the hit to my knight on c3. I went ahead and I can see there's a lot of intriguing problems going to go on here if I'm not careful. So I go ahead and bring up my bishop to d2 and my opponent castles. Now at this point in time he's got a good central pawn and he's got a great outpost, even though it's not a permanent outpost. But it's definitely influential, and I need to clarify this area over here on the queen side. So I'm going to try to clarify this situation and see what happens. Interestingly, instead of this, he takes my bishop down here on d2. And so I take his knight, and so we have a general imbalance. And now he pulls his bishop back to a5. So the general imbalance at this point with this opening is I have the two knights and my opponent has the two bishops. So he's going to want to open up the board. I'm going to want to try to keep the board relatively closed, and I've got a good chance of doing this with my central pawns here. Nothing's locked in the center as of yet, but I'm going to try to make my knights stronger. Well, I'm going to chase his bishop back further. The center isn't closed, but at this point I'm thinking on a brief, it's a 5-minute blitz, so I have to think quickly. It's controlled, so I'm going to go ahead and push the wing and push him back. And now I get a piece ahead, and I like this very much. He pushes the d6 pawn to challenge my pawn structure, of course, and I'm going to take his bishop. Now I'm a bishop ahead, which is very nice. However, he took the pawn with his a pawn, giving him an open file here and a weak a3 pawn. You see how that works? So my center seems pretty solid, but he doesn't have a lot of weaknesses either. He's not exactly weak. There's a potential weakness here, but he's going to be able to push that, so I can't necessarily focus on this. I want to watch his open file here, because that can make for a tough situation. But overall, I'm a power up, so no matter how I set this up, I'm going to feel free to exchange him down, right? So now I can begin trying hard to find some tactics within my very speedy, limited amount of time that I have. And I go ahead, since he has the doubled pawns, I'm going to go ahead and push this b pawn to stop them from marching forward. Hopefully, this can generate a weakness. As a general rule, it's the lead pawn that's normally weak with doubled pawns, although right now that's not a weak pawn because he's got support from the c7 pawn. And he brings out his bishop. Bishop d7. I'm going to go ahead and keep pressing on the queen side. I've got more space. My center is rock solid. I'm going to go ahead and push up the queen side. Why not? That's the area that I can play best in. And then, of course, he pops up that c pawn really strongly. See, I told you it wasn't a weakness yet. It's certainly not going to be a weakness now. In fact, in this situation, I'm going to go ahead and change the pawns out because I think I have a better pawn structure at this point than he does. And I have better ways of blocking him on his side, maintaining my queenside space. This is why I brought out the bishop to c4. Also, notice I have this diagonal to the king, so I like that move myself very much. Queen f6 comes up. Now I castle. This is going to be a pretty good battle. So in a blitz game, in every blitz game I've ever played, you've got a castle. The sooner the better, because you're going so fast and hard that you don't have time to technically strategize. You just got to use what you've learned, and that's all you've got. Play like crazy. Rook comes over to d8, grabbing the open file straight across from my queen. That's always a good idea. That is not a bad idea. You want to be careful about this. Rook f to d8. And now, of course, bishop drops back, threatening the queen and the rook. Bishop c8. A discovered attack, so to speak, but I could see it coming. So it's not a surprise. So I come over to queen e2, and the rook takes the rook, and my rook takes his rook. I have the open file now, and the queen takes my knight. So, at this point, I have the open file. He's not very well developed. This is what I'm banking on. I'm no longer, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 powers. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4 powers, but his queen's the only one out here, and she's completely unguarded. I also believe I have him stronger here as a blocked point, that his knight can't come out very easy, and his bishop has absolutely nowhere to go. Right? More or less. So I'm banking on this to use it to win this game. And I'm going to come and take the 8th rank, absolutely. Because of his undeveloped nature, I'm going to take advantage of every imbalance that I can in order to have a stronger game. Now I can come up here, knight g5 check. King comes out to g6. And now I can press. I've got his queenside under control. He is still undeveloped because I'm hitting him so fast and hard with checks. I'm going to keep this here and try to build a mating net around him. You notice several of his pieces block his escape squares. He's got 2 pawns and a third one here. So if I can keep my knight there and I'm blocking him in, that's what I'm looking for, is that mating net. Queen comes down here to a1, and I dodge up to h2, and now he virtually has nothing left, right? So he comes to h6. If I can get it in there. He comes to h6 to try to get rid of my knight and to give him an escape square, right? I've got this pawn, knight e6. Now, I've switched the squares of influence from here to here. Now I cover these 2 squares, right? And his bishop comes up and takes my knight. So, my bishop comes up and takes his bishop, and his queen comes up and begins taking the queenside pawns. Now do you see what's happening? I think I have him where I want him because of my superior development. Rook comes down here to d6, and I'm going to do a beautiful discovered check on his king here just shortly. His queen comes over to b4, and I go bishop g8, checkmate. That's kind of fun, isn't it? With just a brief understanding of the imbalances that Silman has taught in his chess books, with the idea of being able to incorporate a full development, and he was only half developed, literally, truly, using mostly just his queen. Because of that, I was able to sneak in and put the point, build a mating net around his king. This is some of the principles of attacking chess, is being able to speedily develop your entire army, utilize the open files when you've got your rooks, your long diagonals when you have your bishops, and pulling out all your pieces, pawns and pieces coordinating to chase that king into checkmate. Another excellent game was played by Potemkin and Alekhine in 1912 in St. Petersburg. And he opened up with king pawn. Alekhine is playing black, so he plays a Sicilian. It's a closed Sicilian that he plays. And it's a very intriguing way of how Alekhine attacks the king because he can no longer castle. Knight e2, they're both beginning to develop pretty good. Alekhine's more aggressively developing toward the center, I think. He pushes the c3 pawn. The idea here is to improve the d4 push when he pushes that pawn that way with c3 to give his strength more power. And then he goes knight a3. And this is a questionable way to do this. This is not the right way to do this. Alekhine comes immediately into the center. E takes the d5 pawn. Knight takes the d5 pawn, and now you can see the power of Alekhine's center building up, can't you? Knight comes back down here to c2. You see how Potemkin's knights just are not in the center like Alekhine's. This decides against him in this particular game. Alekhine castles. Finally, he gets the d4 pawn push, exchanges the pawn, he exchanges the pawn. He's got the isolated d pawn now, and Alekhine comes out here to g4, directly against the pinning the knight to the queen. Potemkin doesn't like that pin at all. And now you can see the difference in the positions with the center development and the better development of black, can't you? It's a very, this is a sleeper bishop though. If that opens up, that's a monster bishop. That's a great skewer if Alekhine's not careful. Knight comes out here to e3 to put the question to the bishop and the knight. Now he's beginning to try to challenge the center. Queen comes out here to a5 check to the king, and the king is virtually forced to move out of this position. So he comes up here to f2. Now that the king has lost the right to castle, watch how speedily Alekhine attacks that king. This is really intriguing. Knight d to b4. He's going to come after him. Knight takes the bishop. Queen takes the knight. You notice how speedily Alekhine's queen comes over to the king's side here. This is very interesting how he does this. g4, he's trying to give himself a little bit of power or strength or whatever, but it's too little too late. Knight d3 check. This is a terrific combination. King went up to g3, and that wasn't the best move he could have done. Now the knight takes d4, and you can see the overwhelming power of Aлекhine's position here. Because he's moving in swiftly, because that king is out in the open and he can no longer castle. This is one of the keys to attacking successfully. Isn't that fascinating? He sacrifices his queen to bring in his knights. Watch this. Knight takes f5 check, and it's here that white resigned. Isn't that fun? Why? Because if king goes to g4, h5 goes check. And then king drops back to h3, and knight comes to f2, checkmate. Isn't that intriguing how Alekhine was able to utilize his knights and his pawns to checkmate that errant king? This again is another principle involved in attacking an uncastled king. You have to move swift. You have to bring as many pieces in as fast as possible. That's one of the keys to king attacks, especially against the uncastled kings. So there you have it. So that's your chess exercise for today. Thanks for watching my videos. I have fun making these, you guys. They're a ball. It helps me reinforce the ideas I'm learning in Silman's chess course. Happy checkmating, happy chess playing, and I'll see you in the next video.